Atoms cannot change the number of protons. If we change the number of protons, that changes the element. So if we are going to have an atom that changes charge, it's the number of electrons that need to change. And so if we gain electrons, they become negatively charged. If we lose electrons, they become positively charged. And we call those ions. So we've previously talked about isotopes. Isotopes is when we have the same number of protons, but we gain neutrons. Ions are when we have the same number of protons, but we gain or lose electrons. If they're negatively charged, we call those anions. And if they're positively charged, we call them cations. Now, one way that I was taught to remember this is that cations are positive. Looks more like a bunny than a cat, but cations are positive or plusy cat, and that might help you remember that cations are positively charged. Ions behave very differently than their neutral atoms do. So a common example of this is sodium. So the sodium ion is what we find in table salts, Na+. It's very non-reactive, very stable. If we take sodium metal, so neutral sodium, you cannot find it in nature because it is so reactive. It actually, when added to water, will produce hydrogen gas and catch fire. So they have very different properties, the neutral versus the ion. Because we have materials like table salt where we have a positive sodium, we must have an equal amount of negative charge because overall the material is neutral. So our sodium has a positive charge. In table salt, our anion is chlorine. It has a negative charge, and when we combine them, overall the charge is 0. So nonmetals are found on the right-hand side of the periodic table, and they form anions. Remember, their anions are negative, so they're gaining electrons, and for each electron that's gained is one more negative charge. So if we add one extra electron more than we have protons, it becomes a -1 charge. And we usually leave off the negative, or we leave off the 1. We just write the negative sign. So in our example of fluorine, becomes F- with no 1. For phosphorus, it starts with 15 protons. If we gain 3 electrons, then it becomes a -3 charge. And notice how the number comes before the charge. And this is a convention in chemistry. It's always the number before the charge. We do change the name when we convert it into an anion. So instead of being called fluorine, which is neutral, it becomes fluoride. And you're probably familiar with fluoride because it gets added to toothpaste and also to most drinking water if you live in the city. Oxygen, when we add electrons, becomes oxide. Let's look at the cation now. Metals form cations. so that is the left side of the periodic table, forms cations. And for each electron that is lost, so we have less electrons now, we have more protons. For each electron that's lost, we gain a positive charge on our ion. And again, when there's only one charge, we just write the sign. And if we have multiple charges, like our calcium, lost 2 electrons, we write the number first and then the charge. We do not change the name for cations. They stay the same. We just add the word ion at the end. So sodium becomes a sodium ion. Calcium becomes a calcium ion. Pause the video and see if you can fill out the table producing the ion symbol and filling in the missing information. Let's look at the first one as an example. So we have an atomic number of 16, which means that we have 16 protons because atomic number and protons are equal. We have 18 electrons, which means we have 2 more electrons than protons. Because electrons are negative, we have an ion charge of -2. Because there's 16 protons, we can look at our periodic table, find atomic number 16, and the symbol for that is S, which is sulfur, the -2 charge. If we have protons for our next row, we know the atomic number of 12. It has a +2 charge, which means it has 2 extra protons. So we're going to have 10 electrons. We need more positives than negatives. We look at the periodic table, find number 12 has a symbol of Mg, which is magnesium, the +2 charge. Now we're given the ionic symbol. We know from the symbol we have a +3 charge. If we look on the periodic table for aluminum, it has an atomic number of 13, which means it has 13 protons. It's a +3, so we have less electrons, 3 less, which is 10. So now we have 13 electrons. We know our ion charge is -1. So that means that the number of protons is 1 less than the number of electrons. So we have 35 protons, an atomic number of 35. We look on the periodic table. We have bromine with a -1 charge. Here is the answers.